Hi, you're watching the Tropics topics of Thursday, July the 11th, 2019. We are now tracking what has now been dubbed Tropical Storm Barry out here over the Northern Gulf. This is previously potential Tropical Cyclone 2, which we discussed yesterday. Now has winds of 40 miles per hour and a minimum pressure of 1,005 millibars. This has since become a bona fide tropical cyclone and is going to progress off towards the west and then north, and then we'll be talking about this throughout this video. In addition, we also have another little area at Disturb Weather Invest 93L with a pretty low chance, 10%, of developing over the next 5 days as this progresses east or west across the main development region right here. Not really a threat to land and shouldn't really ever be. So this is a wide shot of the Atlantic here. You can see Barry out here over the Northern Gulf, and then our other little area of disturbed weather, but that's not really the focus of the video today. That's going to be Barry, as it has been for quite a while, or at least the formative stages of such. You see here it is closer up. It's still pretty broad, still pretty loose. It's not very well defined. However, recon did go in, and they were able to close off a center circulation. You can see here they got a center fix about 1,006 millibars, and has since been deepening a little bit, so it's now closer to 1,005 as well. And you can also tell here that the strongest winds are located within the southern quadrants, which you can see on the satellite imagery. That is where the strongest convection is located, so that makes sense there. In addition, the winds they found were probably about 40, closer to a bit closer to 45 miles per hour at the surface, so it's possible that they may upgrade it to 45 miles per hour at the intermediate advisory, but we'll see on that. Regardless, though, it's still pretty elongated and still pretty bruised. I say elongated because the surface center is somewhat elongated from southwest to northeast, kind of in a flow, a little bit like this. You can see where my cursor is. It's kind of like that. Now, these ellipses always tend to rotate counterclockwise, so this northern end is going to rotate about the center, which is located down here, and you can kind of see that right here. A little bit of swirl right here. There's another little tiny vortex right in here, but that's fizzling away. There's another one located up in here, and this is going to rotate up around close towards the mouth of the Mississippi, and at that point, that's when there's going to be more concentration of convection and vorticity, and that's when the system may be able to start organizing again and then possibly re-intensifying as well. As you can see, it's still pretty broad and a lot larger than was initially anticipated by some of the models, and as a result this may take a little bit more time to strengthen, and it doesn't really have a whole lot of time to do so, but we'll see exactly how strong it gets. It's still a little uncertain at this stage, but right now we are starting to see a little bit more certainty come into play, just given that we've seen this evolve over time more. Here's a radar shot out of basically all the radars across the Gulf Coast. You can see not really all the convection is kind of located where the radar coverage doesn't quite reach, so you're not really seeing all those very heavy areas of rain, but instead you're kind of seeing the outer banding. You can see some moving into Florida, through the Panhandle, and up into Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, and these are just the precursors of what is to come. In fact, we had a little bit of a mesoscale system form over Louisiana yesterday that I mentioned in yesterday's update. That brought quite a bit of flooding to New Orleans, and that similar flooding like that can be expected with the system as we go out into the long term. As you can see, there's a little bit more convection firing over here, so this is kind of unassociated with the main area, which is kind of over here, but this is just kind of another little tangent that it's going to be facing over the next several hours, and this will probably move off and then eventually could help merge into the system and help it intensify a little bit more. So here's the water vapor shot here from the NASA MSFC. You can see that this is where our system is located. We have a lot of different features at play here. You can see this upper ridge over here over in Louisiana, Mississippi. This is supposed to be acting as the anticyclone for the system, but it is still displaced to the north. And you can see that it's also not really helping it in terms of dry air, because you can see quite a wide swath of dry air extending from the Carolinas to Georgia and the Panhandle, Alabama, extending down into the Gulf, and it's kind of impeding on Barry right now. You can also tell there's a little bit of a string of upper lows here out along the southeast coast, one over the Outer Banks, another one over here towards the southwestern Bahamas, and both of these are kind of acting to help this dry air get entrained into the system, and this is in the upper levels and mid levels, so this is where it's usually the most detrimental. If not the low levels, then it would be in the mid levels where it's the most detrimental. And as a result, it's kind of impeding on the system a little bit and causing all this convection to be based a little bit more to the south. And you can see that this area right here is also being supported by this upper low that's over the Rio Grande Valley right now, but that's when you get into progress out and move out of the picture. You can also see excuse me. You can also see here that there is a little bit of a frontal boundary that is extending across the Ohio River Valley, and that is going to be a big player in the future forecasting of Barry. As you can see here on the GFS forecast, this is valid as of 12Z this morning. The run's still coming out, but we have enough information out right now. You can see it's initialized it pretty well. You can see still a little bit of decoupling here, but it doesn't really show the elongation of the center because the wind barbs here are at the 700 to 400 millibar levels, and that is in the mid levels of the troposphere. You can see all the moisture here basically based off along and to the south of where the surface center actually is, and you can see that dry air also extending across the Carolinas and into the southeast and training into the system as well. Now you can also tell up here there's a very large area of dry air, and that's behind the cold front that's attached to this upper trough located over here of the Great Lakes. It's the European model initialized as of yesterday evening, and you can see that this trough isn't really, that's a big deal, but what is a big deal is the front that drags behind it, and that is going to be what causes Barry to turn towards north as it kind of breaks down the ridge out here of the four corners a little bit. You can see that the isobars kind of fade away over here, and there's not as much orange coloring, although that is because it is less stronger than anomalously less powerful, I should say. And as a result, the system starts to curve towards north a little bit, in addition to the other ridge building out here to the northeast of the Bahamas. So as a result, Barry is forecast to take a northward turn starting tomorrow, if not tonight, and then it should progress into Louisiana as we get into the day on Saturday. We can see that in the GFS right here. This is tomorrow morning, just south of the mouth of the Mississippi in New Orleans, as a strengthening tropical system. But you can also see that this area of convection here starts to move up towards the west, off towards the upper Texas coast, and then that will fade away with time as well. And you can see here this is tomorrow night, and you can see it's starting to make that curve towards the north, but you can also tell that there is still some decoupling here. You can see that these wind barbs right here kind of circulate around this center right here, while the low-level center is marked in this L with the pressure above it that is not vertically stacked. Therefore, you do not have a rising vertical column of air that would be sufficient to have a bona fidely strengthening tropical storm. So it's not going to be it's likely not going to be overly strong as some of the models initially anticipated, although it is possible that it does somewhat kind of break what some of these models are saying and gets a little bit stronger, but it's still tough to say given the structure of the storm today, and it's going to be important to see how it evolves because it still could be just tropical storm or it could be a little stronger than that. We don't know yet, but but really the intensity isn't what's important. You can see that it's going to be rainfall. You can see all this green right here is moisture, and that's going to be where the rainfall is concentrated near and east of the center over southeast Louisiana into the central Gulf Coast. Even as far west as places like Destin and Panama City could be seeing some rainfall associated with Barry right here. And areas to the west are going to be mostly dry as you're bringing in dry continental air off of this part of the system, and that's being entrained over here, so you're not seeing as much rainfall on this side. Not nearly as much as you're seeing over here because of the Gulf inflow and all this moisture being pumped in from the Gulf. So it's going to be, again, near and east of the center is where the heaviest rainfall will be, and we'll talk about totals in just a little bit. And then you can see here it progresses towards the north as it hits that frontal boundary, and it starts to curve off because the frontal flow is coming out of the southwest, and therefore it feels it more because it's more weak in this run, so it feels it a little bit more that as to opposed if it were higher up in the troposphere. If it extended higher up in the troposphere, then in that case it would just follow the flow up there, and it wouldn't be as significant of an impact as it would on the surface as if it would be a weaker system per se. And as you can see here, it progresses off towards the north and starts to fade away as we get into early next week as well. And the GFS forecast, you can also see here this anticyclone up here. This is also important because this is kind of helping to shear all this off towards the south. You can see it shifts to the west over here. It starts to kind of shift over to East Texas now, and that's causing this tilt that you're seeing right here in the run. And they just reverse the frames a little bit. And you can see, yeah, you can see right here. This is where the mid-level center is. This is where the surface center is. You can see they're not vertically stacked, as I mentioned earlier, and therefore it won't likely get as strong as some of the models initially anticipated. But it still could get at least to hurricane strength. That is still a possibility, but we'll just have to wait and see on that. You can see here these are the European ensembles. You can see most of the weaker runs still bringing it north a little bit earlier. Some of the stronger ones still waiting a little longer. It's likely to fall in between these two solutions. So landfall in and around central Louisiana is the most likely solution, as you can see here in the National Hurricane Center forecast track. bringing Barry into the central Louisiana coastline as a minimal hurricane on Saturday morning, and then progressing up inland after that. You can see tropical storm watches are extended from basically New Orleans all the way to Morgan City, and then hurricane watches as well are going to be extending from essentially Cameron Parish all the way towards the Mississippi border, and then tropical storm watches from Lake Pontchartrain all the way to Mobile as well, generalized at least. And it's going to be not really a wind event, assuming that it doesn't get ridiculously strong, as is not anticipated. But we will see the main threat be rainfall by far. As you can see here, this is the WPC forecast showing a large area of anywhere between 6 and 15 plus inches across areas of eastern Louisiana and western Mississippi, and even possibly farther west, depending on how far west the system likes to track. And you can see lower totals gradually start to taper off as you get far towards the east. This is going to be detrimental for a few reasons. One, obviously, you're having a lot of rainfall coming down in a short period of time. That is a key recipe for flash flooding. But for another, the Mississippi River right now is extremely high and in flood stage. So any more rainfall over this area and is going to just exacerbate the issues. New Orleans already had a pretty big bout of flash flooding yesterday, while the system wasn't even a tropical cyclone yet. So it's going to be a pretty significant rainfall maker, and it's going to be something that people are going to need to be aware of, because this is a very underrated threat for tropical cyclones. Very heavy rainfall, even if it's not ridiculously strong and doesn't linger around like a storm, let's say like Harvey or Florence, it could still drop quite a bit of rainfall, and people need to be aware of that. You can also see here that the risk of flash flooding is still pretty high, 50% actually, from areas of New Orleans west to about Baton Rouge, Lafayette. Maybe not quite as far west as Lafayette, but towards Baton Rouge. You can see this area in pink right here is high, this area in red right here is moderate, and then you can see the gradient kind of extends outwards toward that. So it's going to be a pretty big rainfall maker, and something that could be potentially producing life-threatening flash flooding as well. In addition to that, storm surge is also an issue. Depending on how strong the storm gets, then storm surge is going to follow suit with that. You can see here areas in orange, or it's not orange, yellow here are areas where about, I'd say, 3 feet of inundation are possible right here. 3 to maybe 5 feet of inundation of storm surge is possible. Now, fortunately, this portion of coastline is relatively sparsely populated, but you can get further inland to areas like Morgan City and Halma, and you can still have some pretty significant issues as well. So this is going to be a pretty significant system for portions of Louisiana, Mississippi, and basically across the entire Gulf Coast, from, say, the Texas-Louisiana border towards Panama City. You need to be watching this very, very closely. And in addition, this is going to be something that is going to possibly have the threat of being a little bit stronger than forecast, although the certainty of that is still pretty low. But and even in that situation, that's not the biggest threat. I also want to briefly mention the other invest that formed today, Invest 93L, way out here in the southern main development region. Still pretty broad, still pretty loose, not likely to develop. You can see there's quite a bit of dry, stable Saharan air off towards the north that is not really allowing for convection to form. But you can see it does have a pretty broad envelope of rotation right here. If some of these conditions out here are a little bit better, then we might be watching this for potential development. But right now, it seems pretty unlikely that anything will come of this. Models don't generally do anything with it, so I don't think it's anything to be concerned about. This will progress off towards the west and reach the Caribbean sometime next week, as probably just more than anything a standard tropical wave. So that's about it for today. Thanks for watching, and I hope that anyone in this area of Louisiana and areas of Mississippi and Alabama, even further west towards the Florida, even to the east towards the Florida Panhandle, are watching very, very closely, because this is going to be a pretty significant system for some of these areas in terms of just freshwater flooding, and that can produce quite a few problems in its own right. So be paying attention to that. Stay tuned to your local National Hurricane Center office, your local officials, and right here at Force 13 for the latest information regarding Tropical Storm Barry and all things tropics related. All right, that's it for today. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to stay weather alert during this time.